Hello and welcome to today's webinar on essential published records and resources for Virginia genealogy. My name is Ginevra Morse, Vice President of Education and Programming here at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be your moderator for today's session. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center, American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Our presenter today is Senior Genealogist of the Newbury Street Press, Kyle Hurst. Kyle holds a BA in both history and anthropology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and a master's certificate in museum studies from Tufts University. After 2 years as a volunteer, Kyle joined NEHGS in 2008. For several years, a member of the research services team, she focuses on research in the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, New England, and various European countries. She is the author of several genealogies, including Ancestors and Descendants of Charles Le Caron and Victoire Sprague, which won the 2020 National Genealogical Society Award for Excellence in Genealogy and Family History. Now, Virginia genealogy is a big and complex topic, but lucky for us, family historians, there are several published sources available to researchers. Now, Kyle will discuss 25 go-to published resources covering 5 different categories: genealogies, journals, land, taxation, and history. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll address those at the end. There is a syllabus for this session that can be purchased from our online bookstore. You'll find a link to that downloadable PDF in your reminder emails, as well as in your follow-up email after today's broadcast. We're also recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can freely go back and review any of the content from today's presentation on our website, as well as our YouTube channel. So if you miss something on today's first listen, not to worry, you can always go back and review the presentation later. All right, so without further ado, I will turn things over to Kyle.
Thank you, Ginevra. Well, as she just explained, we're going to focus on 5 basic categories of Virginia research. And since our time is limited, we'll look at 5 sources for each. So that means that by the end of this webinar, you will have 25 published resources that you can keep in mind as you start and as you continue your research in Virginia. But first, let's orient ourselves a bit. Now, if you come to the NEHGS Research Library in Boston, you will end up spending a lot of time in this particular aisle on our 5th floor, which contains much of our published works on Virginia. The most used items, however, are up on the 7th floor in a reference section. Almost every single item that we'll discuss in this webinar can be found in the NEHGS library, but I will also be pointing out any websites which offer online versions. A quick reminder, or if you're not familiar with Virginia geography, it did used to encompass much more land than it currently does. As you see in this map, West Virginia did not break off until 1863. And Virginia had claims to lands pushing westward, so Kentucky was actually included until it became the 15th state in 1792. With the sources that we'll discuss and many others, we come across categorizations and descriptions based on regions. In Virginia, there are 2 types of regions to be aware of. As we see in this water sciences map from the U.S. Geological Survey, we have obviously geological regions. Settlement spread from the coastal plain, most often that's referred to as the tidewater, and then pushed westward and northward along the Piedmont, and finally crossed the Blue Ridge into the Valley and Appalachian areas. Now, as we see from the map below, Virginia's 8 regions. Virginia also has cultural and demographic regions. So you may see published resources specific to, say, the Southwest region, which is marked in red, or the South Side region in light green, or the most populous, the Northern region, in orange. Gaining an understanding of these regions and the internal migrations of Virginia, those are examples of just why we should use published resources for Virginia research. Virginia had the earliest English settlements and grew into the largest and most populous colony. And as such, its inhabitants were looking for more space and opportunities, both inside and outside the changing bounds of Virginia. The amount of people coming and going, along with those shifting boundaries, often means researchers need to understand and check records from multiple locations within Virginia. Over the years, researchers have published their findings about these Virginian families and topics. Referring to articles and texts can provide insight and ideas for further research. Throughout its history, various parts of Virginia, they did fall into the path of wars, leaving behind burned counties with destroyed record sets. And published resources can help fill in gaps and point researchers towards what records survived. Published abstracts that come with alphabetical listings or indexes can really save us time digging through record sets. Abstracts even allow us to track affiliated parties in addition to the primary subjects in the records. Making use of Virginia's many wonderful published resources will really deepen our understanding and shorten our research time. So, our first category speaks to that long history ever since the English colonists first settled at Jamestown in 1607 through becoming a leading colony as the home of several of the most well known founding fathers and mothers, and 7 of the first 12 US presidents. Then Virginia held an important role in the Civil War as it broke into two states on opposing sides, and Virginia's history continues to remain relevant to our nation's history. So, why should we use published histories about Virginia and locations within? Well, published histories, they can be the key to understanding certain concepts like the laws and jurisdictions that governed the areas where your ancestors lived, the records that were kept at the time and where they're currently held, and if they even continue to exist, context for your ancestors' lives, motivations for their actions. So let's take a look at 5 published histories that can lay the foundation for this research that we aim to accomplish here in Virginia. Our first text, it's friendly and illustrated and treats all of the basic topics in brief. This 4th edition of the Hornbook of Virginia History was produced by the Library of Virginia in 1994, the earliest version dating back to 1949. As the Library of Virginia, LVA, advertises, the Hornbook is a must on the bookshelves of everyone who reads, researches, writes, or even cares about Virginia history. As the subtitle states, this is a ready reference guide to the Old Dominions, people, places, and past. So, for the past, in addition to an 80-page history of Virginia, we also have listings of the Commonwealth's historic documents and emblems. Virginia places like counties, cities, rivers, churches, educational institutions, and even parks all have brief descriptions. And finally, for people, we have a list of the number of Virginia's population and mini biographies of Virginia's executive officers and those who served the entire nation. Now let's take a glance inside the Hornbook of Virginia history. We can see from the table of contents there's a wide range of topics being covered. The history section, as shown here, is written in a personable way and broken up by fantastic illustrations. Personally, I find things like this population growth chart is really helpful if I'm writing context around a family's movements in and out of Virginia. Then we have a sample from the county summaries to show that even counties formerly in Virginia but now in West Virginia or Kentucky are also covered. Now, for an overview of 4 centuries of Virginia history, my choice is Old Dominion, New Commonwealth, A History of Virginia, 1607 to 2007, as published by the University of Virginia. As you can tell from the dates, it was timed to coincide with the 400th anniversary of Jamestown. 4 history professors divided up the work by centuries. So the earliest section was done by Anthony Parrott of Wake Forest University. The 18th century was covered by John Culp of the U.S. Naval Academy. The first half of the 19th century was written by William Shade of Lehigh University. And from the Civil War to 2007, along with the bulk of the editing that was in the hands of Ronald Heinemann of the Hampton-Sydney College. As the jacket flap tells us, this was the first comprehensive, accessible, one-volume history of Virginia since the 1970s. And the major themes that they emphasize going throughout Virginia's history include change in continuity, a conservative political order, race and slavery, economic development, social divisions, and how they relate to national events. And we can see that the 16 chapters are broken up by time period. I like that each of them has their own bibliography so I can easily see where the historian is drawing from for each of the topics. The book has few maps, but they are good ones. We're looking at the geographical regions of Virginia, which is obviously showing those geological regions, but you can see some of the demographic ones written in as well. There's also a map of slaveholders in Virginia with counties shaded to show the percentage of white family owners. And that kind of map is key for understanding the split between Virginia and West Virginia during the Civil War. Now I want to share with you my favorite Virginia resource. I use it constantly when I'm researching and writing about families who migrated into, through, and then out of Virginia. The authors, David Hackett Fisher, who is professor of history at Brandeis University, and James C. Kelly, who is assistant director for museums at the Virginia Historical Society, they were tasked with launching an exhibit from the Virginia Historical Society into a study of Virginia migration. The result is called Bound Away, Virginia and the Westward Movement. As a publisher, the University of Virginia Press tells us they suggest that the oxymoron "bound away" from the folk song Shenandoah captures a vital truth about American history. As people moved west, they built new societies from old materials in a double acting process that made America what it is today. The 6 chapters cover topics of migration to Virginia, migration in Virginia, migration beyond Virginia, then problems of cause and consequence, African American migration, and even cultural legacy. And each of these chapters is broken further into sections on specific peoples or regions. So we can really get a deeper understanding of, say, why a family came to move from one region to another and then beyond Virginia's borders. As you'll learn within Bound Away, in Virginia, a distinctive pattern of internal migration developed that was different than the other colonial regions. And those internal migration rates remained high throughout the 17th and 18th century. And most Virginians didn't actually leave Virginia until after the American Revolutionary War ended. One of the most helpful parts of Bound Away are the maps, which we're looking at here. These are migration maps. One is of the migration streams in Virginia, and the other is of the African origins of Virginia's slaves. The book also has maps of specific regions, like of the Tidewater, of the Northern Neck, of the Shenandoah Valley. And there are also early Virginia maps, like of the Wilderness Road. Really, honestly, I cannot recommend this book enough for anyone who's researching migrations pertaining to Virginia. Now, let's get into geographical history. To research in Virginia, we need to know when counties formed, what changing jurisdictions affected the keeping of record sets that we need to access. To figure out these shifting boundaries, we can reference Virginia counties, those resulting from Virginia legislation. This was published in 1916 as a bulletin of the Library of Virginia. Since that means it's now in the public domain, it can be accessed online. Its primary purpose is to identify Virginia laws that created each county. And to do this, it arranges the data on the county names, the formation dates, the preceding county names, and the references. They're arranged in 4 different ways. First, there are 3 tables. One's organized alphabetically by county name, then chronologically by formation date, and finally grouped by geographical region. And the regions used are Tidewater, Piedmont, Valley, and Trans-Allegheny. The fourth method is described by the author, that's Morgan P. Robinson. He describes it as genealogical. Let's take a look at that genealogical arrangement to show the county formations. Robinson includes lineage descendant charts showing how counties descended from the original 8 shires and the original county of Northumberland, which he refers to as the immigrant ancestors. Includes abbreviations like E meaning extinct, K for Kentucky, W for West Virginia. So we can see even formations of former Virginia counties. In this example, we can follow descendants of Northumberland County to the formation of Augusta County in 1740 and then its descendants down. This is a really neat way of looking at county formations. For our final history text, I've chosen a gateway into other sources. Virginia in the American Revolution is part of the Source Guide series done by the Daughters of the American Revolution. As such, the majority of this very massive book consists of bibliographies organized by topic. The first 3 topics, developing a research strategy, major research centers, and geographical factors affecting research, those can be really helpful as we get started. The remaining topics aren't even limited to the American Revolution despite the name. Now, since this book is so heavy and yet something that you might want to have in a hand when you're at a library, you may be interested to know that the DAR also sells it as a PDF. Now, as one of the most useful sections, let's take a look at the contents of Chapter 3, Geographical Factors Affecting Research in Virginia. After a brief intro, we start off with general geography sources. Then we have tools like maps. And what I find most helpful is that we have sections on geographic features like the Blue Ridge Mountains, major rivers like the Potomac, the Shenandoah, and roads like Wilderness Road, as shown here. Other sections cover boundary disputes, like those with Pennsylvania, which I come across a lot in my own research, but also with Maryland, with North Carolina, with Kentucky, and so forth. And later, Chapter 15 breaks things down by regions and counties, focusing on Revolutionary times. So to recap, our 5 history published sources contain 2 general histories in the Hornbook of Virginia History by the Library of Virginia, Old Dominion, New Commonwealth, published by the University of Virginia. Our primary migration source is Bound Away, coming out of the Virginia Historical Society. For county formation and other reference ideas, we have Virginia Counties by LVA and Virginia in the American Revolution by the DAR. For more suggestions, check out the suggested readings. And you'll find this as a study guide on the website of the Library of Virginia. Now, another way to learn about particular topics in Virginia's history is to read articles in journals. Virginia has been home to several scholarly journals that are often titled as magazines but described as quarterly journals. These publications host articles on a wide variety of topics pertaining to Virginia history and genealogy. So, why use journals? Well, articles are more succinct in their treatment than reading an entire book on any particular topic. And thanks to the inclusion of citations and the fact that a professional editor has reviewed the article, usually these are very trusted sources. You may even find your family treated in one or more articles. Or you can use the abstracts and transcriptions of various record sets that are printed in journals, and citations that could lead you to other resources or record sets that could provide breakthroughs in your research. Now, before we fully dive in, here's a big tip for you. The Virginia Historical Index, compiled by Dr. Earl Greg Swem, indexes the first 3 journals we're about to discuss. Swem worked at the Library of Congress, the Library of Virginia, and then the College of William and Mary, though this project came out of the Virginia Historical Society. With all that access and the help of his wife and 6 other women, they indexed all the pre-1930 articles from 5 publications and 2 sets of governmental records. The original index has 2 volumes, which NEHDS's copy is split into 4. The index can also be searched on site if you're at the Earl Greg Swem Library at the College of William and Mary. They've put it on their public computers. So how does the index work? When we find the entry, as we have here for Nicholas Marteau, who's an immigrant ancestor of George Washington, we see a code, in this case 1T52-57. The first number is a volume number, the letter is an abbreviation for the publication title, and the rest are page numbers. So we know that we can find an article about the Marteau family in Tyler's Quarterly, Volume 1, pages 52 to 57. So let's take a look at those three journals indexed in Virginia Historical Index. First, we have the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, the quarterly journal of the Virginia Historical Society. This journal was started in 1893 and is ongoing. The latest issue was volume 129, and they can all be accessed online via jstore.org. So as you can already tell, that's a lot of Virginian history being covered. In the past, the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography offered transcriptions and abstracts, but as the website now describes, it primarily publishes articles and book reviews on Virginia and Southern history. Still, the second part of that title is biography, and individuals frequent the pages of this journal. You may be able to find references to your own ancestor in addition to general information on historical topics. Now let's peek inside one of the recent issues, which do tend to run on themes. This is volume 127, number 3, and it's dedicated to the earliest Africans arriving in Virginia. We have in this an overarching historical article called The Arrival of the First Africans to English North America. But notice that it follows at least one personal story for an African named Angela, and it explores the only records on which her name appears, the 1624 and 1625 censuses. So this article would have relevance to anyone researching not only Angela, but also wanting information about record sets related to these early arrivals. Our second pick is the quarterly journal of the College of William and Mary called, quite naturally, the William and Mary Quarterly. The publication has 3 series. The first was started in 1892 by Lyon G. Tyler, who was the son of President John Tyler and became the 17th president of the College of William and Mary. He edited 48 volumes, ending with 1920. The second series then picked up and lasted for 23 volumes from 1921 to 1943, and the latest series currently has 79 volumes and is ongoing. The Omohundro Institute of Early American History and Culture now publishes this quarterly. And as the Institute says, the William and Mary Quarterly is a journal of early American history and culture to 1820. It's one of the oldest academic journals in the US and was one of the first 10 archived on JSTOR. Today, the quarterly ranks among the most cited journals covering a specific time and place, and is one of the most respected and most acclaimed historical journals in the world. End quote. As mentioned, both the William and Mary Quarterly and the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography can be accessed online at jstore.org. JSTOR describes itself as a digital library, and it can usually be accessed through your public library. For example, I log in using my Boston Public Library card number. Articles from issues in the public domain can usually be viewed without logging in. We can see here how an article from the William and Mary Quarterly appears on JSTOR. Dating from 1923 in Volume 3 of Series 2, this article provides a look into the French and Indian War based on Augusta County records. Now, the reason the first series ended had to do with Dr. Lyon G. Tyler moving on. In 1919, he started Tyler's Quarterly Historical and Genealogical magazine. The new publication focused on history articles and transcripts from records, and the genealogical material that's promised by the title was in the back along with book reviews. When Tyler died in 1935, his wife took over as editor until 1952, and the final volume, 33, was supposed to launch a new editor, but instead ended the publication. Only the first 6 volumes, those that are in the public domain, are available online, and I recommend accessing them through hatitrust.org, where you can see a listing of all of them at once. Now, remember that we had checked the Virginia Historical Index and found an entry for Nicholas Marteau in Tyler's Quarterly? Well, here's where that index listing led. We can see that this article would be helpful in researching an immigrant um, because it's referencing records like land grants and head rights, which we'll come back to that topic in a later segment. But we start to see how articles help us launch into other avenues of research. Our fourth journal comes directly on the heels of the other three. John Frederick Dorman, one of the biggest names of Virginia genealogy, who unfortunately just died this past year, he launched the Virginia Genealogist in 1957 because, as he wrote in this welcome to readers, Tyler's Quarterly had been discontinued and the William and Mary Quarterly had stopped publishing family records. Only the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography continued, but that meant it didn't have the space to meet the demands for genealogical articles. So, for the next 200 issues and 50 volumes, ending in 2006, Dorman was the editor focusing on source materials and accounts of families in Virginia. The entire run is available online at AmericanAncestors.org in a searchable database. Here's a look at the very first table of contents to see what Dorman had in mind for the Virginia genealogist. Here we see there are copies of existing wills for destroyed record sets, a sheriff's tax book, extracts from 2 gazettes, a family Bible, 4 book reviews, and queries. On a lark, I pulled up the book review for Adventurers of Person because, as we'll see later, Dorman himself would work on a subsequent edition. But this kind of review, a book review, can really point you in the right direction, give you some ideas for your own research. So finally, we have the Magazine of Virginia Genealogy, the quarterly journal of the Virginia Genealogical Society, which formed in 1960 and soon published society bulletins. So starting in 1963, they started calling them the Virginia Genealogical Society Quarterly Bulletin. After 8 more volumes in 1970, the name became Virginia Genealogical Society Quarterly. And it wasn't until 1984 that they started using the current name, Magazine of Virginia Genealogy. The first 40 volumes are available on Ancestry.com. Look under the name Virginia Genealogical Society Quarterly. But the journal is still ongoing, with the latest volume being 59. Now, according to the Virginia Genealogical Society's guidelines, any material submitted should focus on Virginia, but they can include individuals or families that have a Virginia connection. And furthermore, they're looking for transcriptions and abstracts of original unpublished materials or county or state records that aren't easily accessible, and they prefer material prior to 1850. As an example, let's look at volume 31 from November 1993, which features transcriptions of selected wills from the burned record counties of Virginia and some unrecorded wills. In writing a genealogy for Cokie Roberts, she had 2 brides with the Cole maiden name that this will transcription helped us place. So to recap again, our 5 Virginia-wide journals are the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, the William and Mary Quarterly, Tyler's Quarterly, the Virginia Genealogist, and the Magazine of Virginia Genealogy. But there are many wonderful regional journals that may be relevant to your research. Depending on where your ancestors lived, you may want to look through publications dedicated to Southside, Southwest, the Tidewater, or Northern Virginia. Of course, as genealogists, we know it's always easier if someone else has already done some of the work for us. Many Americans have genealogical connections to Virginia because, of course, it had the most colonial residents and, again, experienced high numbers of migration. And with Virginia having so many established families, it may be all the more likely that you can find a relevant published genealogy. Published genealogies share similar benefits to the journal, like having your own ancestors laid out with source citations that can lead to other research. What I really find helpful about genealogies is that I can use them to wrap my head around the family connections and to distinguish between all the folks who share the same name. And once we find the correct ancestor, we may see a lot more detail in their biography about what they're doing, when and where. And published genealogies, they can save us from having to dive into the records themselves, or at the very least, really point us in the right direction in our own research. Some of the best known compilations of Virginia genealogists come out of the same journals we've been discussing. John Frederick Dorman, remember he was the editor of the Virginia Genealogist. He worked with the Genealogical Publishing Company during the early 1980s, and they extracted genealogical articles out of the first three of those major journals. All of the three had their own separate series, but they share the same overarching title, Genealogies of Virginia Families. One set of genealogies of Virginia families has a subtitle, From the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography. As you can surmise, these 5 volumes consist of articles drawn directly from the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography. And the topics of the articles are organized alphabetically by the subject family's surname. So subsequently, the volumes are also broken up by surname. Now, this particular set is not available online, so you will need to visit a library like NEHGS or purchase the volumes. So, what kind of articles might we expect? From this table of contents, we see multiple titles relating to the Claiborne family, listed here with the citations to the original articles. The first is simply called Claiborne Genealogy, and it was written in 1894 and published in the very first volume of Virginia Magazine of History and Biography. It has a register-style treatment of the Claiborne family through at least 3 generations. Later, we have an article called The English Ancestry of William Claiborne of Virginia, and that was published in volume 53 in 1945, but it refers back to that original 1894 article. Another set of genealogies of Virginia families has the subtitle From the William and Mary College Quarterly Historical Magazine. Just like the previous set, these 5 volumes, organized alphabetically by surname, the articles extracted from the William and Mary Quarterly. The set spans 1892 to 1943, when the journal stopped including the genealogical contributions. According to one review, by that point, they had published over 500 genealogies already. Now, unlike the other set, all 5 volumes of this set are available online at Ancestry.com. For a couple of examples of the kinds of articles we'll find in the William and Mary Quarterly compilation, we have here an index of Calvert's 1664 to 1799, which is coming out of records from Stafford, Prince William, Fairfax, and Culpeper counties, with the intention to index the names and attach them to their residences during specific years. Now, unlike that article spanning 12 pages, we also have very brief entries like this page and a half on an Irish estate, the Burke or Bork family. The final set of genealogies of Virginia families comes from Tyler's Quarterly Historical and Genealogical Magazine. Organized like the other two, the articles are split into just 4 volumes. And these are available to view online at archive.org, but it looks like you'll need to log in and borrow them. For this example, I chose my own surname, even though I don't have any personal connections to Virginia. So from the table of contents, we see one listing for the Hurst family, but there are several citations to the original volumes and pages of Tyler's Quarterly. And when we look at the entries, we see that the author, Mrs. J.H. Cornelius, had 5 continuations to the Hurst family, and even a follow-up with another family. So see how each article ends with to be continued, and the numbering in the genealogy leaves off and picks up in the next, like here with the 51 at the end of one article and starting with 52 in the next. That's what makes it so great about these compilations. We can see all of these continuations in the same place, one after the other, instead of having to hunt them down in individual issues of each volume in which they were first printed. Now, let's turn to two sources that compile biographical and genealogical material pertaining to Virginia's earliest families. The most popular such source is the set of Adventurers of Person. The Order of the First Families of Virginia, 1607 to 1620, sponsored this compilation. And the fourth edition, as I mentioned earlier, was done by Dorman. And this is another of the quadricentennial commemorations. The purpose of this collection was to document the 109 stockholders or adventurers who were either adventurers of purse, that is, they came between 1607 and 1624-25 and left descendants or whose grandchildren came to carry on the families, or the adventurers of person, who were individuals who immigrated to Virginia and left descendants. So, to follow these people, they started with the muster of January 1624-25, and then followed 6 generations of all those people named there. And that's, as Heritage Books points out in the advertisement, that's enough to bring most of these families down to the Revolution or early federal periods. Now, the 3 volumes are alphabetized by surname. So for our example, we're looking for the Cole family, and we check the first volume covering surnames beginning A to F. At the beginning, we have some great intro materials like this glossary. Then we have the muster listings themselves. And when we get to the genealogical treatment of the Cole family, we see again how William Cole arrived on the Neptune in 1618, while his wife Frances beat him there by 2 years, arriving on the Susan in 1616. Now, following the immigrant William, the Cole line had 2 more Williams before getting down to the 4th-generation daughters, Martha and Jane, who, as we see here, had children marry into the Claiborne line that eventually carried down to Cokie Roberts. Note, too, that the same Magazine of Virginia Genealogy article that we used to see their father's will is cited here. So I highly recommend checking out Adventurers of Person if you have any early Virginians. Similarly, Virginia Immigrants and Adventurers, 1607 to 1635, was done at the same time for the same reason and pretty closely concerned with the same early arrivals. However, here we're looking at annotated biographical sketches instead of genealogies. And the author, Martha W. McCartney, notes that 227 people were missing from that 1624 census. So this collection aims to fill in those gaps and then extends the date of inclusion for another 10 years out to 1635. So she's covering 5,500 original colonists in this one big text. In addition to following specific folks, I do find the intro chapter, Where They Were, to be very good for understanding early settlements and plantations. And that intro starts off with a map showing those settlements as we're looking at here. But mostly we're using the mini bios to gather ideas for other sources that we can check. Circled here is the DOR. That means that this citation is for Dorman's Adventurers of Person. But note that this is the only one on the page with that citation, meaning the rest of these Coles go beyond that work. So again, this is a good starting point for any early Virginians. So the major 3 collections are all along the same lines, genealogies of Virginia families that are extracted from the 3 major journals. And then we have 2 collections pertaining to the earliest Virginians, Adventures of Person, and Virginia Immigrants and Adventurers 1607 to 1635. Now, what do we do when we have to look deeper than published genealogies and journal articles? Well, published resources exist for many record sets that we'll use when researching family histories. In Virginia, 2 of the most useful types of records are those pertaining to land and those having to do with taxation, and the 2 often go hand in hand, like, say, with property taxes. Now, there are many reasons why we turn to land records and why we turn to published sources covering those land records. Land records often prove to be the key to identifying family groups living in Virginia. So we'll see things like they put the ancestors in a specific time and place. They may detail the family relationships either directly or you can use context clues to figure them out. They may expand the circle of friends and neighbors, etc. And of course, we can learn more about an ancestor's economic status, standing in the community, and their movements from place to place. Now, published resources can speed up the process by listing the grantors, grantees, patentees, either alphabetically or via indexing, and indexing all names in the records so we can find neighbors and other affiliates as well as the subjects. Abstracting records can help us really quickly compare so we can draw conclusions more easily. And we can use citations, of course, to find the original records if we want to know more detail. For background information on the records that are held by the Land Office, which now are in the Library of Virginia, do see the book Virginia Land Grants, a study of conveyancing in relation to colonial politics. Dating back to 1925, this text is public domain, so you can find it online, like at familysearch.org. As you'll see, Virginia is deeply tied to its land. The Virginia Company launched by distributing land and then even retained property rights as the Crown took over governing the colony. So Virginia really perpetuates the mindset that immigrants are entitled to land, and they used a head right system. Then, when the crown had a crisis with King Charles I's beheading in 1648-49, Virginia remained loyal to his son, King Charles II, who then granted his English supporters the remaining Tidewater lands to give out as proprietors. So, with those, we have the two major forms of land distribution: land patents as kept by the Virginia government, and the Northern Neck grants as kept by the proprietors. And these are the two types covered by the chapters in Virginia land grants. And then they're compared in the final chapter, which this segment is looking for an economic explanation of the local resistance to and the ultimate acceptance of the proprietors of the Northern Neck. Now, happily for us, the compilations of articles from the three Virginia journals didn't just stop with genealogies. So, as the note explains, this single volume called Virginia Land Records pulls together articles that deal with early Virginia land records, namely deeds, surveys, warrants, conveyances, patents, grants, and contains virtually every article pertaining to the transfer and ownership of real property ever published in these periodicals. And yes, we can search and read these articles online at ancestry.com. Mostly there, we're going to find many abstracts, transcriptions, and listings of names. Looking over the contents, we see that at least 30 counties are the subject of specific articles, 7 sets cover multiple counties, and 8 articles pertain to counties in what became Kentucky and West Virginia. Our examples are 2 different articles from Caroline County, one from 1910 that has immigrants that had to give an oath to the county court in order to claim their 50 acres, and another from 1911 has brief abstracts from the county survey book. The introductory note points out that some of these articles even have more genealogical information than was listed in Cavaliers and Pioneers, which is going to be our next resource. So the remaining 3 sources pertaining to specific land record sets. So let's pause a moment and orient ourselves by this map. Remember that Virginia was, as you'd expect, settled along the coast first and then up waterways. So that means that the earliest settlements were in the Tidewater region. And you can see that in the gray shading here. That's the extent of European settlement by 1699. And that's via the land grants I mentioned. Now, the crisscrossed area to the north here, that's showing the Fairfax Grant, which is another name for the Northern Neck grants. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look first at the land grants. Cavaliers and Pioneers contains, as the subtitle states, abstracts of Virginia land patents and grants, and they cover the 42 volumes of colonial patent books from the Virginia Land Office that's held at the Library of Virginia. Now, as the intro tells us, the abstracts contain all names of persons and of places, dates, and lands recorded therein. The initial 3 volumes, covering 1623 to 1732, those were compiled by Nell Marion Nugent, the custodian of the Virginia Land Archives. And then the Virginia Genealogical Society continued the series, bringing it up to 1776. So what are we seeing in these patent book abstracts? Well, to obtain land, a settler had to present a receipt proving that passage to the colony was paid. And these even included the Africans that arrived in Virginia in 1619. The abstracts give the name of the patentee, the number of acres and county and description of the land, the date of the patent, and a citation to the book and page where it was recorded. But of a lot of interest to us genealogists for our research is that the names of the people that were transported are also listed. So in this example, we're back to that Nicholas Marteau. Remember how Tyler's Quarterly had an article mentioning a land grant? Well, here we have the family group. And we have in 1639, Captain Nicholas Marteau claimed the settlement head right for himself, his wife, his namesake son, and his daughter Elizabeth. And then he claimed them again because he paid their passage. And in 1648, Elizabeth's husband, Counselor George Reed, claimed them yet again. But most importantly, we can take that volume and page and we could pull up the patent itself online at Family Search as shown here, or on the website of the Library of Virginia. And then we have the Virginia Northern Neck Land Grants, which abstract the original grant book of the Northern Neck's land proprietary, aka again, Fairfax land proprietary. The territory is shown in the map here from Bound Away. The headright system wasn't recognized here. Instead, proprietors who didn't even have to live there granted lands once a person purchased a warrant and had the land surveyed. The earliest grants, 1690 to 92, were covered by Nugent in a supplement to Cavaliers and Pioneers. So this series by Gertrude E. Gray picks up in 1694, continues through 4 volumes all the way to the year 1862. That's right before West Virginia broke away. All 4 volumes of Virginia Northern Neck Land Grants are available on Ancestry.com. As you can see from the sample page from Volume 3, these abstracts can be quite brief, but they make it possible to search all these adjoining names. And like if you look above and below the red, you even see heirs and wills listed here. And the abstracts give us enough information to go off of. So we can take the citation I-91 here to find the grant through the Library of Virginia, which holds the Land Office archives. LVA has digitized this collection. So without going all the way to Virginia, I can see all of these additional details upon pulling the record up itself, but it's so much faster having the citation. I can go right to that volume and page. Now to talk about the one item that is not held at the NEHGS Research Library because it's technically a typescript, but fortunately it is online at familysearch.org. So while clerk of the State Land Office, Nell Marion Nugent compiled recorded surveys abstracted. When Virginia broke away from England to be part of the United States of America, in 1779, they set up their own land office with an elected register whose job was to administer any of the remaining land distributions at the Commonwealth level. And from that point, the process was similar to that in the Northern Neck. So a person paid a fee for a receipt, they received a certificate. From the certificate, the land office issued a warrant that authorized a surveyor to lay off the land, and the surveys were returned to the land office to be recorded so a governor could sign off on a grant. And those books of surveys are exactly what Nugent abstracted here. And she covered at least 9 books of surveys outside the Northern Neck and the first 4 books of the Northern Neck set. Unlike the parenthetical title shown here, these surveys actually date more like 1786 to 1809. As we would expect, the abstracts include a citation to the original survey book, and we'll see all of the county and acreage details for the warrantee who's seeking a grant. This survey is for David Gray. It was done in May 1796 and goes on to include many details pertaining to heirs. Again, we use that abstract to find the original survey. The Northern Neck volumes are digitized by LVA. Both sets of survey books are online at familysearch.org. And we go to Family Search and pull up, as we can see, Survey Book 49, page 113, we see the actual survey drawing for the 800 acres, and there are no less than three full pages of more details. Now, I've mentioned that many of the original books are available through LVA. Here's a look at their online collection, Virginia Land Patents and Grants, which has land patents 1623 to 1774, land grants starting in 1779, Northern Neck proprietary grants 1690 to 1874, and those Northern Neck surveys 1786 to 1874. So again, to recap our land category, we have an informative text in Virginia Land Grants, a compilation of journal articles in Virginia Land Records, and then 3 books for specific record sets, Cavaliers and Pioneers, Virginia Northern Neck Land Grants, and Recorded Surveys Abstracted. But of course, these are all concerned with Virginia issued land grants. For deeds between individuals, look for published abstracts of county deeds. They're usually on a county by county basis, so you'll need to know where your ancestors lived and what county held jurisdiction at any given time. For our final category, let's look at some published resources related to taxation. As our first source does, we're going to include in this category a variety of records such as property tax lists, personal property tax lists, tithables, poll lists, rent rolls. And for definitions and more information about these records, do see the research guides that are available on the website for the Library of Virginia. Now, Virginia, especially in counties in which more popular record sets have been destroyed, tax records often prove necessary for drawing conclusions, or at least making educated guesses about the ancestors' actions and residences at certain times. So again, you really want to use these sources as substitutes for census, land, and probate records. And these published sources can help us put these ancestors in a specific time and place. And again, we're back to learning more about their economic status, their standing in community, their movements. But really, we want to use the fact that they're alphabetical or indexed to make it quicker for us to find them and then compare the records. Yet again, we're starting with a compilation of articles coming out of those 3 same major journals. This time, it's called Virginia Tax Records, and the articles usually pertain to Virginia's early periods. As the note here points out, they represent only a fraction of the early tax records of Virginia, but a large portion of the surviving records, which of course makes them all the more important. Now, as the subtitle tells us, these extracted articles were originally from the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, the William and Mary Quarterly, and Tyler's Quarterly. And from the contents, we can see the variety of records that these articles cover: poll lists, personal property lists, poll for the election, quit rent rolls, tithables. And they're arranged by county. The records are dated 1654 to 1850, but the majority are from the 1700s. As we see, Virginia Tax Records is available and searchable at Ancestry.com. Now, the next 3 published sources all depend on tax records from the 1780s as a substitute for the missing 1790 federal census. Virginia's federal census returns were destroyed during the War of 1812, but the statistics on the population did survive, and they show that Virginia had over 747,000 households, which was 300,000 more than the next largest population. To try to identify these households, the U.S. Bureau of the Census looked at the state enumerations for 1782 to 1785, as on file at the Library of Virginia, but they were only able to cover about half the state, 39 of 80 counties, and about 370,000 households. In 1908, they organized what they had. They organized it by county, and relying on indexing instead of alphabetizing. And the book's full title is Heads of Families at the First Census of the United States, taken in the year 1790, Records of the State Enumerations 1782 to 1785, Virginia. And it is available online since it's in the public domain. In example pages, we can see that there are different column headings depending on the county. So Amelia County here only has names with numbers of white and blacks in the household, while Orange County counts the dwellings and other buildings. The next attempt to cover the 1790 census was done in 1940, entitled Virginia Taxpayer 1782 to 87, with the subtitle Other Than Those Published by the United States Census Bureau. So obviously, this book's purpose was to try to gather information on the missing half of Virginia. The compiler used the earliest extant tax list to identify households in 35 other counties. And these tax lists range from 1782 to 1787. Instead of splitting up by county, this text alphabetizes every name and then includes a column to indicate the county name. And the other columns are for white polls and the number of enslaved persons. The text is digitized but not searchable on familysearch.org. The final 1790 substitute that I'm going to recommend was compiled in 1987 for the bicentennial of the adoption of the Constitution. It uses a 1787 tax list because they're closer to 1790 and were completed by more counties since it was a state tax. The 1787 Census of Virginia bears the lengthy subtitle that tells you exactly what this book has, an accounting of the name of every white male tithable over 21 years, the number of white males between 16 and 21 years, the number of slaves over 16 and those under 16 years, together with a listing of their horses, cattle, carriages, and so on. The estimate is that this work covers 95 to 98% of all white male tithables in Virginia in 1787. The first two volumes are organized by county with tax lists, tax districts listed in each, and each of those tax district lists are alphabetized by the first initial of the surname. Volume 3 you'll see is just one big index. Now, for one book that I've written, I spent ages going year by year through property and personal tax lists for one particular county, tracking 3 families who intermarried. And published lists like this one helped jumpstart my search for the Fletcher family. So, having found them in a particular district of the county, I then had to interpret the columns given here. Using the key at the front of the book, the first column is for white males 16 to 21, and we see that Thomas Fletcher had 2 of them. Right below his entry, we see Richard and John being covered by Thomas because they were still minors. So here we have strong evidence that Richard and John were sons of Thomas and can place their births between the years 1766 and 1771. And that's coming from just the 1787 tax list. For our final taxation source, let's look at Virginia tithables from burned record counties, compiled at the Library of Virginia. As the introduction explains, it's hard to track the migrations within Virginia back to the pioneer because you have missing record sets like that. It's really impeding your search. So this book contains the names from the existing tithable list for the late colonial period for 5 counties for which all or most court records no longer exist. From the table of contents, we see what those 5 counties are and that the lists date between 1763 and 1775. So that's the years leading up to the American Revolutionary War. The surnames are arranged alphabetically and the county and year are listed in the next columns, followed by the number of tithables in acres. So rounding out our published resources, we have another article compilation in Virginia Tax Records and 3 sources using taxes to substitute the 1790 census, and finally, Virginia tithables from burned counties, which the title really tells you it all. So what that means is we have now made it through 25 Virginia-focused published sources. As one of the most famous Virginians, Thomas Jefferson, once wrote in a letter, "Books are indeed with me a necessary of life." And for Virginia research, books are indeed necessary.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. Now, before we get to your questions, I just wanted to tell you about a few upcoming programs. It's not too late to register for our conversation course on researching notorious relatives, whether you have criminals, horse thieves, bootleggers, madams, or even witches in your family tree. Don't miss that presentation next Monday. With Chief Genealogist David Allen Lambert, who will be in conversation with bestselling author Russell Shorto and biographer Debbie Applegate. Then on April 4th, Maud Newton will discuss her book Ancestors Trouble, or Ancestor Trouble with New Yorker staff writer Casey Sepp. And if you're getting started in genealogy or just need a refresh, be sure to join us in April for a 3-week course on building your genealogical skills. You can learn about these and all of our upcoming events at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so I know we're at time, but let's take a few minutes here and get to some questions. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, go ahead and type it into the Q&A panel. I did also mention at the start of the program that there is a syllabus that's available for sale that actually documents all of these resources and provides more. Kyle created a 19-page handout, so if you're interested in that, I will be including the link to that syllabus in my follow-up email. So we have a question from Ruth who says, I have my husband's family back to Virginia, but no specific counties or towns. So if you don't have maybe a specific county or town, can you still kind of dive into these published sources?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I really focused on Virginia wide in this presentation, because these journals cover every part. So if you can find a clue as to, your surname in one of these broader searches, which are now searchable, that's the beauty of these things. When I mention these online access points like JSTOR.org, Ancestry.com, that makes them searchable. So you can throw your name in there and you're checking through 79 volumes of a journal. So it's highly likely that you can find somebody that you're looking for with that kind of access.
Now, Teresa says, if you're planning a research trip to Virginia, which libraries should you plan on visiting?
Well, you absolutely need to go to Richmond. That's where the Library of Virginia is, and it's all one big beautiful building. I visited there in 2019 and I can't recommend it enough. It's attached to the museum, which is the Virginia Historical Society's headquarters as well. So yes, Richmond, Virginia is the place to go.
Great. Now, you mentioned most of these, or a lot of these published resources are available online, either through Ancestry or HathiTrust or in the public domain. For those published resources that haven't been digitized, maybe they're still in copyright, what's the best way to find those closest to you?
Oh, yes, good question. So absolutely you need to dive into some library catalogs. Now, if you were to purchase the syllabus that I've put together, I did include call numbers on them. They're Library of Congress call numbers. So they don't just work for here at NEHGS in our library, but any library system that's using the Library of Congress call numbers, you can plug those in. But even just having the name or the author, you can go to um, not just the NEHGS to our library catalog, but there's worldcat.org, which pulls from library catalogs all over the country and beyond. So worldcat.org, that's where you want to go to search a wide range of library catalogs to find the closest to you. You can plug in your zip code in there and it will tell you how far away the nearest location of that item is.
Now, you mentioned a few resources, especially the journals being available on JSTOR. Betsy asks, do you need a paid membership to research those articles and transcripts on JSTOR?
Not necessarily, no. You can search without logging in at all. And all of the out of copyright articles are going to be free to view before logging in. And when you do need to log in, when you hit that point where they're in copyright and you want to see the page that your search has brought you to, then look to see what institutions around you might have access through. I mentioned that I use my Boston Public Library card to get my access to JSTOR, and you may have a university that you're affiliated with that has access. So it doesn't need to be a personal account. You have options that you can look and see how you can gain access.
You also mentioned kind of early on and really throughout the presentation, the importance of understanding changing boundaries. What are some online resources or maybe maps for really understanding those changing borders?
Sure, there's two major ones that I use and that my colleagues use. There is mapofus.org. That's just a regular website and it does all states basically. And then the Newberry Library in Chicago has a great online county. These are both really showing county formation changes using maps. So either mapofus.org or the Newberry Library in Chicago's.
Great. Now, Dorothy asks, are the early genealogies such as person generally accepted as still being accurate today?
As far as I'm aware, yes, because the ones that I'm recommending to you have citations, so you can follow the research. We always say in genealogy, trust but verify. So as long as there's some kind of indication of where somebody got their information from, you can usually lean on that research. But again, follow up with the details. Go see what the original sources look like. A lot of them have been digitized as well.
And since one of your categories was taxation records, Vicky does ask if you can explain the difference between tithables and poll taxes.
Yes, there's not much difference, quite honestly, and the Library of Virginia's website has very clear definitions for all of them, as well as more recommendations for where you can find them. So I absolutely recommend that any questions that you have pertaining to Virginia research or even beyond, they have an excellent selection of West Virginia resources, for example, that they're recommending through the Library of Virginia's website. So do check that out.
All right, I know that there are several more detailed questions. And Ro is asking, will the presentation be viewable online after today? Yes. So this recording has been recorded. And I know Kyle covered a lot of information over the last hour. You'll probably want to go back and maybe review some of the items and materials, take more copious notes. So this has been recorded. It will be viewable on our website as well as our YouTube channel. And that should be posted later today, and you'll get an email with the follow-up, both with a link to the recording as well as to that to the syllabus that we've mentioned that outlines all of these materials and actually provides even more. We do have a question: how can one obtain a library card for the Virginia Library? I mean, is that just something that if you're planning your research trip, do you know if it's easy to get a card or
I
yeah.
I honestly don't remember needing a card, but again, this goes back to 2019 was the time that I was there. Uh, I would check their website and see what their requirements are for coming in, but in general, I don't think that you need a card for the Library of Virginia, to my memory. I'm sorry, can't recall specifically.
Well, and I think that goes to show that it's always important before you go anywhere, check their website, maybe even give them a call, especially now as, you know, still being in kind of COVID times, hours change, access changes. So definitely give them a call in advance. So unfortunately, that's all all the time that we have for today. If you have more specific questions about your family history research, you may consider hiring our research services team or using our expanded chat service. The chat service is free, open to the public. It puts you in direct communication with a genealogist, and that service is available on our website at americanancestors.org/chat, Tuesday through Saturday, 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, with extended hours on Wednesdays, 9 to 8 p.m. And to access that service, again, just simply go to americanancestors.org/chat. So thank you again for joining us. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback as we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings. Any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free and to create more free programs for you and for others. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org. Best of luck in your research, and I hope to see you online in the future. Goodbye for now.